Before it is too late, understand one reality that nearly every popular image of nuclear disaster gets wrong. Most people imagine the greatest danger ending with the blinding flash, the shock wave, and the collapse of buildings. Yet for the overwhelming majority of people who are outside the immediate zone of complete destruction, survival is not decided during the first few seconds. It is decided during the first hour, the first day, and the first 2 weeks afterward. Those critical hours determine whether radiation exposure remains low enough for recovery or rises high enough to cause severe injury or death. Civil defense research conducted over decades, emergency planning documents, atmospheric science, structural engineering, radiation physics, and disaster medicine all point toward the same conclusion. The people who survive are rarely the strongest or the fastest. They are usually the ones who understand timing, shelter, contamination, and the invisible behavior of radioactive material. Nuclear emergencies are not governed by instinct. They are governed by physics. The greatest threat after the explosion is often not what people can see, but what they unknowingly walk into, because they misunderstand how fallout actually behaves. The first misunderstanding begins with the assumption that if someone survives the blast, escaping as far as possible is automatically the safest decision. That instinct makes sense during floods, wildfires, and earthquakes, but nuclear fallout changes the rules completely. Radioactive particles are carried by the atmosphere after the fireball rises, cooling as they mix with pulverized soil, concrete, steel, and debris. Eventually, those particles return to the ground, sometimes within minutes, sometimes over several hours, depending on weather, particle size, and distance from the detonation. During that period, roads become exposure corridors rather than escape routes. Vehicles trapped in traffic provide almost no meaningful shielding from penetrating gamma radiation. A person driving directly beneath a developing fallout plume may receive a far greater radiation dose than someone who immediately entered a reinforced basement and remained there. This is one of the least intuitive survival principles because every natural instinct encourages movement away from danger. Radiation, however, punishes unnecessary movement during the wrong time window. Understanding why requires examining how radiation interacts with matter rather than relying on dramatic imagery. Fallout particles emit several forms of ionizing radiation, but gamma radiation represents one of the most significant hazards because of its ability to penetrate walls, vehicles, and even portions of the human body. Protection therefore depends less on distance traveled during active fallout and far more on shielding material placed between the person and the radioactive source. Dense materials such as reinforced concrete, compacted earth, brick, and thick layers of packed books or water absorb portions of gamma energy before it reaches living tissue. This is why underground structures, interior basements, subway systems built below ground, and heavily reinforced buildings consistently appear in emergency preparedness planning. Every additional layer of dense material reduces exposure. Survival is not determined by comfort. It is determined by attenuation, the measurable reduction of radiation intensity as it passes through shielding. Time forms the second pillar of nuclear survival, yet it is frequently overlooked because radioactive contamination is often imagined as remaining equally dangerous forever. In reality, fallout loses strength rapidly during the earliest period after deposition because many of the most intense radioactive isotopes decay quickly. Emergency planners often describe this through practical guidance rather than expecting civilians to calculate isotope half-lives. The first several hours represent the period of greatest hazard. After approximately 7 hours, radiation intensity from fresh fallout may decline dramatically compared to its initial level. After roughly 48 hours, it continues decreasing. After 2 weeks, many short-lived isotopes have decayed substantially, although contamination may still require caution and monitoring. This does not mean danger disappears. It means exposure is heavily influenced by when movement occurs. Every unnecessary minute spent outside during peak fallout conditions accumulates dose that cannot later be removed from the body. Evidence from historical nuclear testing, radiation monitoring, and decades of emergency planning repeatedly demonstrates this relationship between shielding and timing. Atmospheric tests conducted during the 20th century generated valuable data, not because they were desirable events, but because they allowed scientists to measure how radioactive particles dispersed, settled, and decayed under different weather conditions.